Thank you, Payal, for the lovely introduction. And let's not waste any time and keep the ball rolling. So, good morning, everybody. It's a lovely morning, only that we're at home and we can't go out, and we don't know how long this will be. So, let's be happy. So, as the topic runs, inculcating practical emotional intelligence. Like Payal said, you know, this needs no introduction. It's no secret that EQ is critical to your success. But and it is twice as more effective, or maybe Sachin would know better how effective it is than any other competency. But knowing emotional intelligence is something else, and the knowledge how to use it in your life and in the workplace, which also covers your life, are two different things. This we will learn from our panelists today, and you can ask as many questions. The second thing is, let's look at the scenario where we are today. So we've read a lot about it, and we are in the midst of it. That there are these unprecedented human challenges we all of us are facing. So what most companies, what have they done around the world? It's not only in India. They have risen to the occasion, and they are trying to safeguard the interest of the employees. But let's look at it. We never thought that this would go on for so long, and we don't even know how long it'll go on. So the challenges are increasing. So first we introduced the remote work, and then the remote was just not enough. We did a hybrid thing. Then we have the multi-generation workforce that was already, gig economy was already coming. So it's all mixed up together with so many challenges. And in the midst of this, what do we have? We have people. People are running everything now, whether they are facing the challenges or they are part of it. And people are the new currency. That's a term that we use today. So, what do we do that we can work with the people can work? Is that competency that we are looking for? And as Sachin has said earlier, and so has Payal, that it's the emotional intelligence that everybody is getting focused on. How have do I have enough knowledge on emotional intelligence? How do I use it? So we will discuss this in detail. I will discuss just two aspects of it. See, there are five aspects as far as I remember. Daniel Goleman said that there are five aspects of emotional intelligence. I remember self-awareness, self-regulation, internal motivation, empathy, relationship management, and social skills. Sachin, I hope I am right. So, the so what do we?
Yes, yes, that's correct.
Okay, I think some of them are twisted and turn a little way, but somehow they all reach the same place. So emotional intelligence, as we understand, it's a ability, it's a skill, maybe it's a capacity to, first of all, we need to identify, then we assess and we manage what? Emotions. Whose emotions? Our emotions and the emotions of others. I think if we can understand that, that's good enough. But somehow I feel, and maybe most people feel, that two things that are very important that come out highlighted. One is self-awareness and self-regulation. At work, it is so important that it is said that 83% of people high in self-awareness are top performers. I don't know how correct the figure is, but self-awareness and self-regulation seem to be really highlighted. How you can see, we are a bag of emotions all the time. While I'm speaking to you, there's so many emotions in my head. While you're listening to me, there's so many emotions with you. But how you regulate it, how you prioritize it, that I think is the skill that is required. And I will narrate. See, I'm a storyteller. I love telling stories. I'm not sure if everybody loves listening to them, but I try to to explain my point with some story or narrate something that people can resonate with. Okay, just give me a moment. Just give me. Okay, are you guys with me?
Yes,
Okay. So if my fellow panelists are okay, can I narrate this small story? I need your consent.
please. Yes,
Go.
please.
Yes,
Okay.
please.
So, this is extract from Bhagavad Gita that sums up the entire concept of self-regulation. In fact, EI. So the background is the Kurukshetra war. Okay, I'm sure most of you are familiar with it, where the first cousins, they were standing each against each other. You had the Pandavas and you had the Kauravas. And with the Pandavas, of course, was Arjuna, the warrior who was unparalleled, the mightiest of the mightiest. Nobody could defeat him because of his focus. He was the greatest warrior of all times. But at that point of moment, at that point of time, he was not even willing to fight. He had almost given up. Why? Because, cutting it short, he had those emotions within him. There was a moral dilemma going on in his head that, these are my cousins. Is it my duty? Should I fight or not? I know perhaps you all can understand, would have read this and can understand. But this is what had happened. And then Krishna, cutting it short, cautions Arjuna for his lack of mental strength. And he points out to him that supremacy of people are those who have absolute control of their mind, those who are focused on their duty, and those who are unperturbed by emotions. I think the last three words are very important for us today. We should not be perturbed by our emotions. Let us run our emotions. Let our emotions not run us. This is important. So this is from the personal point of view, how each of us should conduct ourselves. Now let's go back to the second part before I ask the first question is that we're talking about the future workplace. What sort of a workplace are we looking for when today, this big, so many changes have happened due to the pandemic and we were not ready for it. So what is happening? Most organizations are preparing their different structures, how we can be ready, how we can innovate, how can, if anything happens, so that business continuity remains. But organizations are also have realized, since we are talking about EI, that how can I have people whom I can trust, whom I can respect, at the same time compassion, understanding, kindness, forgiveness. To do all that, you need the culture. The culture is the foundation of all this. Okay, how do we build that culture where EI is embedded in it so that people sleep, think, and drink about EI? So, coming to that, to give you a little bit of hint on that. So, culture actually, when you have a culture in an organization, there are three parts of the culture. One is the thinking, that is the cognitive culture, that what are the values, what are the vision of the company, what is the intellectual capacity, all that is cognitive. The second part of the culture that we have is a behavioral culture. How do I conduct myself? How do my teams conduct? What is the code of conduct? What is the actions that we can take? What is acceptable? What is not acceptable? Okay, so that's the doing. The first was thinking, second was doing. And the third is the emotional culture, which we don't give, emphasis on. This is the feeling one. Thinking, doing, feeling. Feeling is those underlying emotions. Do we take context of that? In this climate, when it is so uncertain, when things are so unpredictable and they're rapidly evolving, as a result of emotions, how do people react? And how should leaders react? How should managers react? So, how do we build that emotional culture? That's the third part. So, I think I've given my perspectives on EI. Now, before I start the first question, which is based on, again, one aspect of EI, that is empathy. So, empathy, we know the golden rule. What is empathy? Treat others the way you want to be treated. So, I would like to give emphasis on what Satya Nadella has said. So, how he explained it, he says, empathy is when you're in we know somebody else's shoes, right? But I think somebody needs to mute themselves. While if you can mute.
Yeah.
Are we good to go?
Yes.
So when Satya explained, somebody is very enthused to speak. I'm just going to close. They can speak. Satya explained it is that to be in somebody's shoes, it's okay. But how do you understand when somebody doesn't even speak? That means unarticulated needs. He explained that of the customer. If you can understand his need, if you can understand something that he has not been met with or he has not explained, that is true empathy. So when we walk in the shoes of others and we try to picture things they see, we can experience the world in a way we didn't know. So my first question would go out to Sachin, which says that Satya Nadella has said the source of innovation comes from having a deep sense of empathy. According to you, does empathy help innovation push its way through continuous disruption in the business landscape today?
Thank you, Rashmi. Thank you for that great story from Geeta. I really liked it. That's one of my favorite subjects. Actually, I often talk about this setup in Geeta. So I'll just take 30 seconds about this because you mentioned it. Many people talk about emotional intelligence or when is the right time to learn and all that. And I often tell that Gita was recited on a battlefield, right when the greatest battle was about to happen. And there is no bigger tension in anyone's life than that. And even in that time, Arjun and Krishna, they took time out to talk about the deepest factors that affect our life. So if they can do it, then none of our lives are so in dire need that we cannot explore emotional intelligence at any given situation. So coming back to your question on empathy, yes, I agree with you that empathy plays a very big role in innovation. So especially in corporate world today, we talk about innovation and we are talking about future of workplace. So future of workplace, what has been termed as is as we are progressing towards artificial intelligence, robotics, Generation Z and millennials are becoming larger part of workplace today. What is the way um, to create the collaboration between these? So this future is not just future for many companies. It's happening right now. It is happening in next 3 to 6 months time in most of the places. So as you rightly said that empathy is how you walk in someone's shoes. We look at companies and we can largely divide in two categories. A company could be customer centric or employee centric. Whichever way it is, whether you are customer centric or you are employee centric, the leaders of the organization have to put themselves in the shoes of either the customer or the employee to create whatever culture they want to create. If you are a customer centric company, you have to think from customers point of view. You have to think about their needs, what is beneficial for them, what is going to make their life better. So in order to come up with any innovative product or service that will benefit the customers, you have to be in their shoes. So definitely empathy plays the major role in such situation. On the other hand, if you are an employee centric company, many companies believe that if we take care of our employees, they take care of our customers. Once again, you have to put yourself in the shoes of your employees, that how do you take care of them? So empathy is not just that how I would treat others, how I would like to be treated. That is one part of it. But my preferences could be very different to your preferences. So if I start treating you the way I would like to be treated, that may not be correct. So I have to treat you the way you would like to be treated. So I have to spend some time to study you. I have to spend some time to know you. I have to spend time to know my customers. I have to spend time to know my employees. And I have to put myself out of this equation. My preferences could be whatever. So as a leader, I cannot impose my preferences onto my employees or my customers. And that could be coming from pure heart space as well. I'm not saying that this is manipulation or anything. They could be coming from pure heart space, but that may not be something what they want. So for us to spend that time with our employees and with our customers is very important, and that is where empathy comes into picture, is how to practice this, how to do this. And 100% when this is practiced, innovative ideas come out from there. So no doubt about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sachin. So well said. I mean, there's these points that I've noted down. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can.
Yeah.
Because, you explained it, just to cut it short, the customer-centric organization, employee-centric, and you need to understand. But most importantly, what you said is what I want, they may not want. We can't, self-impose ourselves on others. What my needs may not be the needs of somebody. So we're trying to wear other shoes means to understand what they need. And if once we start understanding what they need, then only the innovation comes in, and those great ideas are built on. Like you said. So now I would like to call on Khushbu. Khushbu, like Sachin said, that, let's not impose. Let's see from the millennial point of view, how do you think that in the present market landscape with all this disruption, how do you think empathy works in this scenario?
So thank you so much, Rashmi ma'am, for giving the wonderful perspective. And as is rightly said by Sachin, empathy is not just thinking about what I would feel in a situation. It is also about thinking what the other person feels. So if I were to talk from a Gen Z or a millennial perspective, I'll tell you a story. So I got to know about this term empathy and understanding the user design when I was doing a course in my undergrad days. And there we used to do a course when we used to understand how user experience works. And that was the first time when I understood what empathy is, because we were taught that you are supposed to understand and walk into other person's shoes, and that will actually help you drive innovation. Now if I were to pick few examples, so let us go back to the era when when there was no Uber, there was no driving or carpooling kind of a thing. So if I don't know if any one of you know this, but Uber came out of a need, because the founder, Mr. Camp, he was actually looking out for a carpooling services, and he figured out that getting a taxi is such a task. And because he went through that problem and he was himself into that problem, he realized that we need a solution like Uber, and hence we have Uber now. And I'm so glad that like, not glad that he went through that situation, but I'm glad that that situation made him go ahead and launch something like Uber. So when we say, or when as you said, that Satya Nadella said that empathy lies in the heart of innovation, I think empathy is core to the innovation culture, and it is very important. And as as individuals, and especially, I don't know about other places, but in India we are very much focused on our hard skills. We are very much focused on improving our HR skills, or maybe my core technical skills. But somehow we are not taught how to enhance our empathy. And maybe we are lacking there, and this is the reason why innovations are happening, but somehow the speed at which we should be innovating, that is not taking place. So that is very important in my opinion.
Thank you, Khushbu. Yes, very well explained about, I think you've understood empathy very well. But your closing para was really good. And I think it really hits the nail on the head when you said in India, we are very focused in our hearts. We are very emotional people. I think every Indian is emotional, whether you're speaking about sports also, people get emotional about that also. But how to enhance that empathy, how to use it in the present context, how to scale it, that I think we need to learn. Thanks a lot, Khushbu. Thanks a lot, Sachin. Now, I think, we will move on to the next question, and I would request Saloni to come on board. Saloni, you're there?
Yeah.
Hi, Saloni. My next question to you is that, you see, we've already discussed this in the beginning, that today we were already having it even before the pandemic, that, we have a multi-generational workforce. You have job aspirants, you have permanent people, then you have freelancers, then you have a gig economy. And now due to the pandemic shifts, the whole market landscape has changed. Then you have a remote and a hybrid structure. So in that, how do you nurture a culture of trust and psychological safety, which is most important? That these 2 points, how the trust is most important, in the sense is that your team member or your colleague, it's not necessary that he sits in front of the laptop for 8 hours or 9 hours. You trust him that he'll finish the work in time. And the psychological safety is that the learner point of view, that if he makes any mistakes, I will still trust him and he will learn from that. So what is your perspective on that, Saloni?
So thank you so much, Rashmi. I believe that, see, people are, they're looking to trust their organizations from an employee perspective. Let's look at it. And their trust is really upheld when they look at their leaders, when they look at their leaders communicating with them in a, not just regularly, but also transparently, right? And the best of the, if you recall one of the questions on Gallup Q12, it talks about your confidence in the senior management. And right now is the time when, if you look at people, they're looking at how is my leadership responding to this crisis. And if they see that yes, there is a response and they are well prepared, the trust goes up. And I mean, nobody could have predicted COVID, but then if and you and me know about it, that when you look at organizations today, they very well know that in the future, this is not the first or the last. We will have many such more, issues that will come up. And the only way to deal with it is to be prepared. And also, how do you, not just exigency services, but also how do you prepare to deal with the people and their insecurities? So imagine many people were fearful of losing jobs. Many people were fearful of their own safety, their aged parents and even children. And organizations, the way they responded to these fears and these insecurities and giving them the reassurance, those were all the small things. And the small things really matter. How do you really take care of your people in emergency situations? That really builds up the trust. So today, most people are working under new conditions. They have all kinds of pressures. And what they really need now, people that, even though they are restricted, they're not able to go out, they're not able to, live a social life, all this distancing and being there. So what they really need to feel is that they are empowered. They need to do what is necessary to keep themselves and their families safe and also well, which means that they need the flexibility to work differently. And, we have heard of so many cases where people have got a little fed up now. They really want this break. They want to go out. And even the timings, they've all got blurred. When do you start work? When do you end work? I'm sure many people who are listening in and who are, working for organizations, they will be experiencing this. So if you have these long hours of work and they're uninterrupted, as an organization, how do you build that trust and how do you build transparency? Is by acknowledging that, yes, these are difficult times. And even our employees need to, secure their own essential supplies, for example. They need to take care of any potential healthcare issues. And most organizations are really, rising to the occasion, understanding very well that, like you rightly said, people is the new currency, that if they don't take care, if they don't really, understand the situation, this trust is going to go away. So yeah, people are looking for consistency, for transparency, for clear communications from their leadership at all levels. And organizations are doing their bit by providing the advice, by providing guidance to help their employees, really adapt to this new situation. So those would be my first initial, thoughts on the current situation that people are feeling.
Thank you, Saloni. So well said. You've covered a lot of points in these last 2 minutes. But your focus on trust and transparency, I think these are really two very important points. Sitting at home, if you feel that you've been trusted and that they are transparent with you, there's nothing that is hidden. You feel somehow, that intrinsic motivation is there, that, I'm there with the company. Otherwise, that psychological contract is broken. You've not seen the office. Many people have not seen the office for 6 months. And like you so well said that, small things really matter, the way you communicate to people. And even if it's in a small, it's a brief period, it's some small gesture, it's very important. And like you said, that in a way, very well said, that people are actually getting fed up, because one thing nobody thought will go on for so long. And all the pleasures of working at home are all going away, because that time between work and life, it's all blurred now. You don't know when to stop. You know, you go on and on and on, you stop and go on, and there's no like 5:30 or 6 offices over and you come home and then you know, you're with a family. Now you're with the family, still you don't know when to stop. So
Exactly.
yeah, so
Right.
this we are humans and we've lived this way, and I think it has affected Indians a lot, because you know, we Indians are very emotional in any case, and like we discussed yesterday, we all want to go back to work. So very well said, you know that. But you
Yeah, just to add one more bit here is that, you know, when so right now I think the key, what is the keys for people, like when you look at adapting to the situation, to also become lifelong learners, right? And that's where the organization HR can play, you know, a very crucial role in enabling this mindset, right? Because you look at innovation, you look at fostering a culture of experimentation, you look at encouraging people to, you know, not just fail but fail fast and learn from there, and having the trust that even if people are you know, not able to deliver to the required you know, levels, but it is these very people who, when you know, invest, and they're going to take your company to the next level. So investing in people and having that trust in people, in showcasing that trust, it becomes it is a very empowering feeling. If my manager were to show all that to me, I would feel so empowered, and yes, that, you know, they believe in me and I can do it.
very well said again, Saloni. You know, that empowering part, yes, I missed on that earlier, but the point you said earlier was even more enriching, was the part about that lifelong learning. It's you know, everybody is taken, I think, the irony is that did it actually take a pandemic for us to become learners? Almost everybody you meet has some inspiring story to say, you know, that I've started this certification, I'm learning this, because we've realized that learning that we did in college and in the B schools, that's just not enough. You know, that's just the threshold. We Anything can happen in future and we need to be equipped. So you know, it has taught us to learn more and more. So I would now take the question to Rashmi. It's nice to it's the first time a Rashmi is asking a question to Rashmi, so that's the humor part of it. Rashmi, Rashmi, I want to know your perspective. You know, as millennials, how are you looking at this whole, landscape with so many, you know, different sort of generations of people working together, then the pandemic on top of it, and then the trust factor, and then the empathy factor. What is your perspective on the whole way? How do you how are you guys dealing with it?
Hi. Firstly, thank you, Saloni, for setting the context very beautifully, and thank you, Rashmi ma'am, for explaining it further. So, as Saloni mentioned, that this workspace, it's not just the beginning. It's not just that the pandemic is there, and only during this time we'll be working from home. I think it's only a stepping stone for us for larger things that are going to happen. So I was reading about it somewhere, and it says that India is going to be a $450 billion economy in the next 5 years when it comes to gig economy. So I mean, this is a question for all the HR professionals, that when we know that there's a huge market of a flexible workforce coming in, how do we communicate our culture and how do we build that psychological contract to everybody? Co- Coming from a Gen Z and a millennial perspective, I think that it's very important that we give them flexibility with the right balance of security. So, while it's very important to give flexibility in the way we are working, in the timings that we are working, in the policies that they want to have, the benefits they want to take for themselves, because I think Sachin also mentioned that we can't impose our needs or our aspirations onto somebody. So, it's very important that that we provide them flexibility in the options that we are offering, and second, we give them that emotional security side by side, that yes, you are there with us, we value you, we are there to enable you and empower you for your jobs to do better. So I think that flexibility with security will be a big component. Apart from that, I think this is like in times of crisis only culture really comes into play. It's very important, and I think it's very easy when you're in office that we are able to communicate our culture, we are able to talk about what we are offering. But during the time of pandemic, I think that is when really the culture comes into play. And from what I have observed in the last 6 7 months, there is no better way of communicating culture than communicating it still. So, over communicating it at every forum that is possible, having multiple leadership sessions, having team connects, communicating it through the manager, or through written documents, however you're able to communicate your unique value proposition, I think that will go a long way, ma'am.
Okay, Rashmi. So well said, and we do understand your perspective. Among all this chaos, what is required first of all is flexibility, right?
Yes.
Flexibility is and that balance of security, that how we value you, as a
Yes.
employee, and how we empower you, and also communication culture. You said, yeah, when you're in the office, culture is so easily transmitted. Not
That's
difficult.
true.
If something goes the wrong way, you can balance it out. But now is the real test, because if your culture, your foundation doesn't work, you can do the entire business planning, but it will not work if you don't have the right culture. And and it's very important in the different ways that you can transmit this is through leadership talks and all those. So very well said, Rashmi. And I think we've got a lot of takeaways already. Now I would like to ask Nirpesh if you can start the Mentimeter rolling with the first question. Okay, and I think we need to go to our chat boxes to see how we can use that. Okay, people have already answered the question, I think.
So the audience can go to the chat box and there is a link to menti.com. Please click on the link and there is a code. You need to give this code. After that, you can answer the questions, and on the screen you can see the answers which audience is giving. So you can see how this chart moves.
Are you finding the link, guys? While you need to help them with the link, maybe.
People are responding, ma'am.
Yeah. We need more people to pull in into this. At least 50% should answer this.
Rashmi, I think we have enough responses now.
Right. We're done? Okay. So, Sachin, you're there. I would,
Yes.
put this across to you, that I think there's a marginal difference between TQ and EQ. And if you can explain this in this context.
Sure. So it seems that most people are going towards trust quotient, as well as as you said, that the difference is not that much. Um, Votes are leaning towards trust quotient. So trust quotient is something which is defined as what defines your trustworthiness to someone. So once again, emotional intelligence and trustworthiness are interlinked, and this is why I think that perhaps you don't see much difference, because people can't really pick one or the other. They are quite interchangeable in that sense that anyone's trustworthiness, reliability, or credibility depends very much on how much the person is evolved on emotional intelligence scale. Um, so when we are more self-regulated, when we show more empathy, when we are showing more self-awareness, our social skills, that does increase our reliability and credibility and trustworthiness among other people. We do seem to be more congruent in our communication. And I suppose that, uh, I mean, the rise in emotional quotient of someone does then relate to rise in their trust quotient as well. So I feel that they are interrelated, and that's perhaps what the result is also showing us.
Absolutely. So well said, Sachin. I think we've explained it too well. And I think we'll move on to the second Mentimeter question, because I first missed the first one at the right moment. And the second question, if I can just explain it to you, and Nirpesh, you can have the second question on board also. So the second question is says that empathy may cloud your moral judgment. Everyone has a moral judgment, and sometimes you're so empathetic that it could encourage bias also, and make you less effective in, you can decision making is very important, but you get so empathic. Do you think it's true or false? I know it's a tricky question, but we just wanted you to, to pick on you on this tricky part. Should we stop now?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I would put this scoring to Saloni. If you can give us an explanation from your point of view, and maybe if you have a story along with that, or an example that how it can, bias works out this way or doesn't work, and how empathy may be effective or not. Yeah,
Can you just share the score once again? I was typing some comments. I didn't take a look. What was the final score like? Can you share that with me?
Nirpesh.
Yeah,
Quite a difference, yeah.
it's quite a difference. Yes. And I would like to say that yes, when you talk about empathy clouding our decisions, yes, it's a great possibility. It can be a poor guide, because empathy is about understanding the pain of the other person. Where is it pinching the other person? And there are some experiments that were done to understand, uh, taking two separate groups of people, where one set of people were said, okay, you hear what this patient who's undergoing some cancer treatment, and he's asking for that his treatment should, he should get it first. And another set of people were asked to look at uh, it more objectively. So when people look at something more objectively, they will, look at everything together. But when people just look at empathy and they're more empathetic, then they may tend to be more favorable, because the empathy is really, heightened and playing up, and it could be a poor decision. So that's like an example that I wanted to quote here. So empathy can be, responsible for, especially for leaders, right? When leaders have to, take the right decisions, then, and they're often told you need to be empathetic, but then you also need to have that balance. So yes, it's important that you look out for, be empathetic, but don't miss out the bigger picture, because it's important for you to take the decisions, the right decisions.
Well, Saloni, very well said. Have the empathy, but don't miss out the bigger picture. No, especially while taking decisions, because it can have a reverse effect, adverse effect actually. And the story about that metaphor about seeing it as a portion and as a whole. Very well said. Thank you, Saloni. I think everyone got it right. Now I will take my Sachin. I'm back to you with the third question.
Rashmi, can I just say something on this poll? Just quick 10, 15 seconds.
Please, more than that.
I actually, to be honest, I actually disagree with this poll, where it says more people are leaning towards true. And I'll just tell you my view on that one. The thing is that as from coaching point of view, if we look at it from that angle, often happens, and this is my personal experience I'm sharing. There are situations when I am in a coaching session with another person, and I am so engrossed in the way they are explaining. And when I put myself in the other person's shoes, which means I'm actually imagining that if I would have the same upbringing experience this person had, if I had the same resources this person had, if I would have gone through life like this person, um, where would I be? Would I be at the point where this person is? And most often, I am at the point where that person is. And many a times in my coaching sessions, I reach a point where my client is confused. They are telling me their story, and I'm so engrossed imagining myself in that one that I equally feel confused at that point. I literally had no answer. And we are basically staring at wall together, thinking basically, oh shit, what to do. And I felt that that is the level of empathy you will experience when you practice that. Of course, we go back and we look at the ways to solve that. So, but I'm saying in that moment when I'm really empathizing with the person, thinking from their angle, what the life they have lived, the resources they had, the conditioning they had, I just feel that I am at that point. So not I wouldn't agree that it clouds my decision, or I judge anything, because rather I'm not judging. I'm actually putting myself in their shoes, that this is the life they are living. This is the conditions they are living. These are the resources they have. So that's just my personal thing, that I think that it's not true.
I believe that when you start wearing the other person's shoes, then it's no longer empathy, it's actually sympathy. And that's really the fine line between being empathetic and understanding, and not being blown away, or you're drowning in the other person's emotions, or um, just being one with him. So I think there's a slight a fine line between the two, where you are not losing yourself. Now, for example, if you are a coach, I am a coach, I need to maintain that, because if I go with him, then I will not be able to help him reach the point where he says, yes, this is what I need to do to deal with my current situation. And if I'm empathetic and say, yes, you're right, oh, I can get you, of course we are doing that. We need to be empathetic too. But how are we as a coach then helping that person address the situation? We feel the pain and he doesn't have a solution because he's not objective about it. He is emotional about it. And that's where we need to help him cross that line. So as a leader or as even a coach, I feel that that's a distinction that we must make, because that's where our value lies. We can create that value for the person whom we are, either, or for the organization that for whom we have to take that decision. So that's my bit.
Thank you, Saloni. Thank you, Sachin. I'm so glad I put such a question that made people discuss so much, because it's really point, to really think and ponder about, both of you all gave your own perspectives from a practical point of view, because both of you all are coaches and you all have actually dealt with it, and it's so different written on paper and what it is real in real life. And this is what we are here for. Thank you so much. Now, I think we'll move on to the third question, which is more about yes, emotional intelligence linked with self-efficacy. That is a person's belief, the ability to succeed in a particular situation. And it says that how people think about themselves, how they behave, and how determined they are. And I would ask Sachin that, to what extent emotional intelligence is related to self-efficacy, and what significance does it have on leadership especially during disruption? Sachin.
Sure. Once again, these are very well linked, one with the other. As in the beginning, you mentioned the 5 components of emotional intelligence. One of them is self-motivation. When we look at self-efficacy, it is about me having confidence. It is about me having confidence in what I believe. So acting on that, being self-motivated, is no doubt, they are interlinked. That any leader must not only be self-motivated but also have the confidence to act on what they believe in. Um, Otherwise, self-motivation is just a theoretical thing. I can just be motivated inside, but if I'm not taking the action, if I'm not showing the confidence to take the necessary action and the decision that I need to take, then that's not complete emotional intelligence in execution, so to speak. It's just theoretical in nature. So I feel that, especially when we are talking a disruptive kind of a workplace now, it becomes more and more important that I'm not only self-motivated, but I have confidence on my ideas, on the innovation that I'm thinking, or whatever I am proposing that needs to be done in order to either disrupt or deal with the disruption caused by my competitors or by other people. In both ways, I think uh, developing emotional intelligence, and practicing it on a daily basis, testing it out, so I might be wrong as well, doesn't matter. I could think of something and I might be wrong, but that's fine. Being wrong and showing the confidence are two different things. I still believe in what I believe in, and I want to execute it. um, when I execute it, when I'm about to execute it, I don't know that I will be wrong. I will never do anything knowingly wrong. So at this moment of time, I feel that whatever I want to do, however I want to address the disruption, I'm right, and then I execute it. However, the action could go wrong, and I may not get the results that I would have expected, and that's all fine. That's totally okay. That should not impact my motivation or my confidence. And this is where the other component of emotional intelligence comes handy, which is self-awareness and self-regulation, is how to manage myself in those situations and keep my motivation and confidence up. So overall, daily practicing emotional intelligence is the key here.
Thank you, Sachin. I think the last line that you said, practicing the emotional intelligence, practicing is important. And as I said in the beginning, knowledge is enough, but how that the key thing you said is to practice it. Unless you practice it, it doesn't. It has no value. And what you said about confidence is so true. Like till you actually don't do it, and you may be wrong. Till when you execute, you have the full confidence. You may go wrong, but so what? Then you use your self-awareness and self-regulation, keep your emotions in place and still have that confidence and intact. In fact, use
Yes.
all the 5 elements together, and you can
100%.
yeah, and you cannot do it till you practice it. And when, at
100%.
the end of the day you see that this went wrong, but how I controlled myself, how I regulated myself, that is all practicing. Thank you so much.
100%.
Wonderful comments. And now we'll go over to Khushbu. Khushbu, how do you think it works with you guys? Because all these are common with all ages. The confidence, self motivation, awareness, and controlling the emotions. And this happens in daily life, and now even more due to the pandemic, I think, because we are in isolation. How do you handle all this?
So thank you, Rashmi ma'am. I think I agree with Sachin to all the points he said. So I will first break this question down into two parts. The first part says that whether or not self-efficacy is linked to emotional intelligence. In my personal opinion, yes, it is highly related. Because if I am not able to control my emotions, how will I be, confident enough, or how will I be able to deal with the challenges? So I'll give you a very simple example. We are, new generational, workforce. We're entering here, and we are supposed to work with all the high-end leaders. So there are times when I have to make certain presentation, and I'm very apprehensive that okay, if I have to go out and speak in front of CHRO, will I be able to do it or not do it? But that's exactly when I need to control my emotion in terms of understanding that it's okay. You're only going to present. What's worse that can happen? So it's like taking control over your own emotions. If the other way around happens, then I'll be, stammering in front of my, leadership team. So I think self-efficacy is very highly related to your emotional intelligence and how do you deal with your emotions in a particular situation, especially in challenging situations. The second bit of the question says that, how about the leadership, or how does leadership, deal with the self-efficacy? So I think, as a leader, especially in the current times, when we don't know what's going to happen next and we are in middle of a pandemic, the self-efficacy of the leader actually drives a lot of things. So I'll give you an example here. In my organization, of course, we were about to do some engagement programs and it all came to a standstill thanks to the COVID. But then, because I was working with a leader who is so high on self-efficacy that, she actually gave me that confidence and she pushed me, and of course the entire team, that, it's okay if it's a pandemic, we can still do this thing. So, had it not been the case where, I would have been associated with a leader who is high on self-efficacy, who knows how to deal with, such challenges to all the bouncers that are coming, you as a leader cannot, motivate yourself as well as your team. And at this point in time, this is very important, and this is the reason why a lot of organizations are now, thinking and debating upon the resilient leadership, which is adapting to any and every kind of situation, which is, making sure that you and your team also adapts and responds to any such crisis equation. And as Sachin said that, it's not just being about motivated, you also have to show something to the organization, you also have to do something. After all, your action speaks louder than your words. So it cannot be of the sort that I make 10 big promises to you, but I'm not able to do it. Well, that's really not going to help me or my case or my organization. So I think, self-efficacy and emotional intelligence are highly interlinked. And if as a Generation Z or as a millennial, if we are given a chance to work with such leaders, who are also high on such, parameters, to be very honest, if you were to ask me that, where and how do you see yourself maybe 10 years down the lane, maybe when you take up that position, I will actually picturize my leader there, that what was the things that she did during these, pandemic times. So this is the reason why, there is a certain level of trust and confidence. And now at this point in time, I'm so confident that you bring anything to me, during this work from home scenario, I'll still be able to navigate and do all the tasks as is required.
I love the way you explain this to us. Of course, about self-efficacy and leadership, as Sachin said, you reiterated that. That was very important. But the 2 points that really came about was that resilient leadership, how important it has become, the whole, that leadership that should be resilient. And the fact that, you give that metaphor that in 10 years from now, if you were to take the position, you would think of the person you're working with now who has been ideal for you, how important it is. I think this is a question to everybody, that she has actually raised it. And we're all thinking about this question in our mind. Are we working with the right people? Because it's very, very important. And this also brings in that link of mentorship. Today millennials are really very smart. Everybody's got a mentor, and thanks to social media, thanks to technology, that you can get the best mentors that you're looking for. Because you even if you don't have the exact CHRO in mind, but even if you have a good mentor, you somehow in the 10 years you will try to build yourself and shape yourself in that way. So well said, Khushbu. I think that's a really good point that you put across. And now maybe we'll move to the last question that will go to Saloni. This is a very interesting one, of course. Saloni, you're there?
Yes.
Yeah. Saloni, I think I've gone off this year. I don't know how this keeps switching on and off. So to what extent, according to you, has technology played a role, in aiding or hindering emotional and psychological well-being, especially in today's context? How has it aided and how has it hindered? I think there are a lot of points you can add on this, I'm sure.
So, technology has always been an enabler, but a good balance is really what is important to get the best out of a technology. And when I'm looking at psychological well-being, or I'm looking at emotional well-being, technology can have a great, rather a large impact on both our mental and our physical health. But so there are the pros and the cons, right? So if you are overly connected, you have a lot of screen time, you're on social media, all of that can also develop certain challenges and issues for you, especially when it comes to this expectation of instant gratification. Like I put some post, and I now need to see whether people are liking it or not, so I want that immediately I should get a great response. So, and while it feeds the ego, and while it is, aiding and helping people get that boost, but if it tips over, right, it can really actually create an issue. And yes, there are people who even go into depression. So there has to be a fine balance, I believe. And our emotional well-being actually is a state when we are comfortable, when we are happy, when we are working on things that give us satisfaction and we enjoy it, right? For example, our own sense of purpose in life, and how we control and how we feel, and how largely we are in control of how life is happening. Or in the other case, if life is happening to us and we feel we are out of control, again, our well-being, sense of well-being, or emotional well-being can go for a toss. So technology here can also aid in, especially when we look at instant communication, when we look at being able to reach out to a lot of people, when we look at even organizations looking at using technology as an enabler to making sure that they're able to reach out to as many people as possible, which would not have been possible if they were to do it manually. So technology again is a great enabler there. We also need to be mindful of any internet, or let's say again when we are online, right? So anything that we do which can cause or create any kind of challenge, which is any kind of social abuse, or any, let's call it internet related abuse, those things can also come into play if we are not careful about what kind of technologies or platforms we are using. So if I were to just take a mix of both, I would say that technology is a great enabler. We can really do good, and it can help us do better in life. But we need to just be in the balance. We need to use it well, and in a way that it doesn't it impacts us positively. It doesn't. We need to be mindful and aware of where it is leading us. So I think those are a few of my points that come to my mind on how technology can be used as an enabler and not as something that takes us down.
Thank you, Saloni. I think you summarized it well. Of course, technology, as you said, it's an enabler. Especially right now, we would not have reached out to our customers, and many shops would have shut down if we had not businesses. If we could not reach out to the customer, if we had not reached out to the people, it's an enabler, Dora. But how to balance it and how to use it effectively, where to draw the line, all that is very important because
It comes from awareness. It comes from being aware of what is this good for me, and is this good for the business, or is it good for my customers? So it comes from awareness, I would say.
Yeah. So you link that awareness to it, and you say that EI again plays a role. That how do I stop? Where do I stop? So that it doesn't start hurting me. So and otherwise, if it wasn't for technology, we won't be here today. Maybe we would have had this webinar also. So very well said. And now I would throw this question to Rashmi. Rashmi, what do you think about this? How in your view, how has technology, of course, enabler we've all said, but I would like you to throw more some points on that hindrance part, where you think there's some connect that has been broken or whatever, if you have any points on that.
Sure. Firstly, I agree with Saloni to a larger extent, and especially with our generations, we've always been surrounded by technology to the most of the part that I think about it. And like we've already stated in our conversation, technology and innovation arises as a need of something. There is an unmet need of the customer or an employee due to which a technology or an innovation comes out. So I really agree with Saloni how when she says that technology is an enabler, the need and the importance of technology is in bringing people together and serving a need and a purpose. If we use it rightly in meeting a demand of a customer or meeting a need of an employee and using it for the purpose of meeting our own different needs, I think that is where technology plays a great role of enabling. But at the same time, we also need to be mindful and conscious, especially as HR professionals, that technology is not a replacement of human interactions. It's a way of making human interactions easier while we're working from different geographies, but it's nowhere a replacement. I'll give you one example. We conducted a rewards and recognitions program just recently, wherein we invited the families of the people who were being facilitated over the Zoom call, and they were also made part of the session. It turned out to be a great event, and everybody applauded and everybody felt connected, even the families of the employee. But I think it would have been even much more impactful had it been in a personal setting. At the end of the day, while the family was feeling proud about their family member getting awarded, it would have been much more better, and the entire emotion had been superfied if if this entire felicitation would have been in person. So I think everybody is trying their bit to make the most of technology, but it's very important to draw that fine line and understand that it's not a replacement to human interactions. Having face to the names associated is very important. Having those developed social skills and understanding, especially somebody's emotions. So we understand them through verbal cues and non-verbal cues. I think the entire aspect of non-verbal cues gets missing when we are only interacting using a means of technology. So to understand that non-verbal cues and then understand somebody better, I think that is where human interactions play a much larger role. So that is what I would like to say, ma'am.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. Absolutely. About the enabler, yes, the need is there, and then the technology, the innovation comes. But it is definitely not a replacement for the human, And that example that you gave when you have that felicitation ceremony, and if they were there in person, it would have really made a difference. It's different on a, though you don't feel that connect when you are
That is true.
it's on a virtual platform. Maybe initially we did feel, but now it's going less and less. I don't know. And what to say, and the fact that those non-verbal cues, how important they are, we realize that right now.
Rashmi, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'll take 30 seconds on the topic because I'm a technology enthusiast, and I'll take only 30 seconds. Sorry to interrupt.
You can take more.
So, I feel that, we are always blaming technology, that, technology is hindering, it is hindering our emotional and psychological well-being. So I'll give you an example here. So we have cars, accessible for everyone. A person who knows driving, irrespective of his age, can drive. But why do we have a limit, a legal limit, that any person, below the age of 18 years cannot drive it? Correct. I'll give you another examples. We all have access to calculators, but we say that all the students till the school time cannot use calculators. However, scientists, use them because they have to use it. That is their need. So I feel blaming technology is not the correct thing that we are doing. I think we need to understand that somehow, as humans, we failed to regulate the use of technology and how it is impacting our life. So I'll give you a very simple example, as is said by Saloni and Rashmi also, that, we need to have a digital hygiene and digital etiquette. So, I sometimes look at my mother and, I feel that she's equally out there like I am. She's on Facebook, she's on Instagram, she's on, all social media platforms. She has WhatsApp group, everything. But I have never seen her, giving time to that. Instead, she's very self-regulated. She knows what's the time for her to do certain course, certain household course. Similarly, what's the time for her to sleep, to get up, to follow her own routine. Whereas I am guilty of binge watching a lot of shows. So, you can take it from any generation. We are millennials. We are watching a lot of shows. No wonder, on weekend. But somehow, I see her and I feel that, it's not technology, that's actually, hampering us. It's maybe because we are letting technology take over our, our comfort and our, emotions. And when I'm tired, what I feel is I can maybe, binge watch Netflix instead of, maybe talking to my friends or something. So I don't think technology is at fault here. I will say that we are somehow letting technology dig deeper into our life. And I'm not sure if any one of you have seen this recent documentary on Netflix, which talks about social dilemma. So that's the documentary name. So there's a very famous quote, that I would like to, quote here, is that if you are not paying for the product, then you are the product, because our attention span is being sold as a product. And this is the reason why the advertisers there are not really selling to us. Actually, we are selling our attention span there. So I think it's very important for us to understand, to regulate, to self-regulate, and how we use technology instead of really, blaming technology.
Thank you, Khushbu. You gave a lot of perspectives. Yes, I've seen the social dilemma, and it's a little scary also. And took a lot of cues. And there's a lot of things I have to learn from your mother, I think, because I'm a technology person, to the extent that, everything. I would love to open my door also with technology, I'm just like, my team gets so fed up. I want to do everything in a technology way. But like you said, you have to learn to self-regulate. I spend so much time on social media, a lot of time, and I don't know how to regulate. I learned that from your mom, maybe. So yes, what you said was, that how to use the technology and where to regulate. I'll tell you before we close this and we go to the Mentimeter, I will give you a short, I'm a storyteller, so I always go with stories. So, now most of us in the organizations, is it okay with the panelists if I say a brief, short metaphor for this?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yes, please.
So, you know what, like we all had started this. See, the onboarding had stopped after all this. You could not call the person who's joining you that come and sit across the table with all the social distancing and all that. So we started that digital onboarding. Actually, we started it before the pandemic, at like 6 months before, getting all the papers online and, having those digital calls and all that. So after all this was over, somehow, I said, let me do a small survey, so sort of, I love these surveys on Google and Self also, primary and secondary. And I asked these people who did it digitally, how was it? Oh, they were like, they were overwhelmed because it was something very new to them. They said, yes, we got, because on the screen, they received their job description, their KRAs, and they went on a digital ride. We had used mixed reality to show them the different places. Then I asked the other lot who had not done the digital one, I mean the normal onboarding one, and I asked people who had joined the company like 20 years back, and I asked not only our company people, I asked various companies, like most of the multinationals. And I said, what is that one thing that you remember of so many years back about your onboarding? Is there anything that you remember of your first day, your induction? What is that? Do you remember? So, a lot of people said one thing that was common. You know what it was? They said, we remember that, when we were introduced to the leader or to the manager or the senior most person in that company or whoever it was, that first handshake, that first pat on the back, welcome to the company. And I think this is that line, that I think is missing. That I don't know, maybe we'll have a virtual handshake or a virtual hug, but this is what was the outcome of the survey, and may be true or not be true. So maybe, without losing more time, we can go back to the Mentimeter again and have, if we have time for 2 brief questions of 1 minute each. So the third question is a little tricky. I'll, and Khushbu, you'll have to explain that. I'll just explain the question to you guys, is that maybe not many people are familiar with what is a psychological contract. So when you join an organization, you actually sign 2 contracts. One, you actually sign on paper, is your appointment letter, which gives you all the terms and rules and regulations and code of conduct, everything. The second one is a psychological contract, that he is my employer, he is my boss, and he's the one who's going to take care of me in some way or the other till my tenure is here. So now what has happened is that with the pandemic, when you're 6 months away, 8 months away, when you don't see your boss, you don't see your colleague, you don't see your line manager, this contract has been broken, whether you like it or not. So here the question goes, can it be maintained by technology or by trust or by whatever emotional intelligence in this system as it was in the physical ecosystem? So this is a challenge, you have to answer it.
So Rashmi, by the time people are responding, I just wanted to keep a time check on in front of you. We have 8 minutes left to close the session. We have around 4 questions received.
So can we extend it by 10 minutes?
I'll just check.
Khushbu, maybe you can start explaining this because we've got a clear indication.
Okay, ma'am, thank you. So thank you, first of all, thank you for setting the context for psychological contract. So I'll, simply put it as, something that is not part of my official, letter, but, that plays a very important part in my everyday working life. And, since we are in middle of a pandemic, so there are few things, which is, I'm sure, affecting every one of us. First being the isolation. I mean, at least it's affecting me. I cannot meet my friends and I'm a person who really loves going out. So of course, isolation. Then worries about job security. Then what about my personal and career development? Is it on hold? Is it, happening in a right manner as it was supposed to be? Am I able to manage work from home with my family? And maybe, for the people who are with kids or, who are married, their kids' responsibility, the families, the elderly's responsibility. So I think all of these things, cloud our judgment, and we are under that impression that, it's not really working out for us, or it's not really going in the way that it should be going. But I personally feel that, psychological contract can still be maintained even if, we are working from home. So there are few things, that, as an organization, we are also doing here. So I'll pick a few examples from my personal experience. So we have this rewards and recognition program. So obviously when we had this COVID, so we were not working, from our offices, and we were working from our remote locations. But, our management made sure that they do not forget to reward and, applaud the people who were working there, who are working in the plants, because we are a manufacturing setup. So we had a special award category called as COVID Yodhas, and all the people, you name any person who went to the plant, during those lockdown time, each and every one of them was applauded. There were separate mails that were, sent to each and every employee. There was recognition that was done in every way. We recognized their families as well. So there was a lot of encouragement, and I would say, like, we already have a very good R&R, which already takes place. But during COVID, it was a level ahead. I mean, we did not expect it to be happening in such a manner. For a moment, I'll be very honest with you, when we entered into the COVID, I expect that, okay, none of the employee engagement activities is going to take place now. We are not going to have any R&R because, we are not working from office. But to our surprise, it actually came out in a much better way, in a much, unanticipated way. And we had so many award categories. And also talking about, well-being. So, our managers have these, one-to-one sessions. So, yesterday only I had a quick catch-up session with my manager and, with my team. And we were discussing about, what's happening, in life and beyond. So it's not like, your psychological contract cannot be honored. I would only say that, for a person, or as a person, what I really look at is having a sense of purpose. So even if I'm working from office, if I don't have a sense of purpose, if I don't have alignment with what I am doing, I won't be able to perform my job, or, to keep up that psychological contract, irrespective of my workplace. I am equally productive at home. I'm equally productive at office. Why? Because I know what I have to do. I know what I am supposed to do. And I know that my organization is also doing what I expect my organization to do in terms of well-being, security, recognition, development. In fact, recently I had my discussion with my manager regarding my developmental plans. So I think, I'm sure all the organizations are taking, efforts in the best possible way to, maintain and honor that psychological contract. So I think it can definitely be, adhered during these times of COVID.
Thank you, Khushbu. I think, you have motivated everyone who's listening, because yes, we were very apprehensive and we were all worried about the employee engagement activities, and it really worked out. And so well, you said, it all depends on where. It's not the workplace actually that matters. You can be anywhere. It's your alignment towards your work and how you take it. Then it turns around. Very well said. Maybe rushing up a little bit, we can have the next question on the Mentimeter. And Rashmi, you can be prepared for the answer, please.
Yeah. Hi, Rashmi. I'm sorry for interrupting in between. We have also received a request from participants to extend the session by 10 minutes.
Okay.
So we are doing that.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. I think we'll make it in 10 minutes. If you have 2 minutes for the Mentimeter, or at least 1 minute.
Sure.
I think we can clearly see the scores tilting towards one side.
Yeah, absolutely. Rashmi, I think you can go ahead.
Yes. So as we can see, the scores are also tilting more towards being human for a more progressive organization and more progressive workspace. I think I completely agree to that. That's very important, and that's imperative, especially in the given times. So, what does it mean to be being humane? That you're valuing your employees, you're treating them right, you're giving them what they require, you're trusting them, and as we were talking about psychological contract, you're investing in their psychological contract. So I think that is very important. And as Gallup survey also shows, employees who are engaged and are happy, they're 20% more productive than other employees. So I think that if you are taking care of being humane at workplace and investing into your people, the productivity aspect will automatically be taken care of. The two things are actually interlinked. And if I give an example of my organization, human touch is actually one of the key competencies on which we measure our talent, our leadership, and anybody who's joining the organization, and not just our employees. Human touch is one of our key behaviors, which we also focus on our customer centric approaches. So I think, and especially with the times which we are heading towards, being human will be a fundamental to a progressive and an open and inclusive organization.
Very well said, Rashmi. And I think the survey clearly indicates, people have already made up their minds, it seems,
Yeah.
whoever participates. And as Khushbu said, we're already looking after the first part, the psychological contract. So if you have to decide between the two, important that, being human and how you do it is very, and it is a core competency, you said, as you said now, no, it is in the
Right.
competency list. We didn't have it. Thank you so
Yes.
much. Now maybe we'll go to the answer round. So I don't see many questions. I don't know if this is a question or not, because it looks like a statement. Shivendra Sharma. Then we have, there's a question to Sachin sir, how to extract emotion from people as everyone knows they have hidden sometimes. Maybe, Sachin, this question is for you.
Okay, okay. Yeah, interesting question. How to extract emotions from people. So, well, we are all already emotional beings. The perhaps what I would see in this question is that why is there a need of it? So it seems like that there is something else is happening that is closing people. So perhaps the need is to look into that in the culture of the company, that what actually um, makes people to hide the emotion. Nobody actually wants to hide emotion, to be honest. I tell you that. I'm sharing from personal experience. um, we all want to express, but we also want to make sure that we are expressing in front of the right people. So if we are not able to express, that could be an indication that perhaps the leadership has not taken enough steps to create a culture of empowerment in there for people to feel safe to express their emotions. So rather than focusing on what I can do to extract emotions from people, look at the environment, look at why it is causing people to hide them. Then people will just express it by themselves. So work on the environment, create a culture of empowerment that will bring out people.
Thank you, Sachin. Create a culture of empowerment. There's an interesting question, and I would want everyone to give us one line, one word for it. One word. Sachin, Saloni, Khushbu, Rashmi. How? Just one word, not more than that. How can we enhance empathy? Sachin, start with you. One word.
Practice.
Practice. Saloni?
Practice.
Yeah, I heard that. Practice. Saloni, what about you?
I would like to think of a different one then. Give me some time. One word.
We'll wait for that. We'll wait, yes. You can say practice also.
Yeah, definitely. Practice is there, but I think it's about also bearing yourself. You know, when you bear yourself to other people, they bear themselves to you. And only people whom you share, they start sharing with you, and and that's where, you know, it's like you take the first step. So if I had to put it differently, you take the first step.
The first step.
Yes, you take the first step.
Khushbu?
I have actually two words to be very honest. The
You just say
first one,
one.
okay, so I'll choose experience. I think because for me, experience will be one of those key factor. Like what I experienced in a situation is something that I may think of translating for someone else also, while it may also vary, but most of the time it's bang on.
Experience. And Rashmi?
I think since it's only one word, I would say listening. Listening is very important in order to practice empathy.
So practice, listening, step, and experience. Very good. So everybody's got good takeaways in one word, so we can finish the questions faster. Um, to inculcate being human approach among leadership, how to go about it? How do you go about? How do you inculcate the human approach? One word for that, each of you. Sachin, start with you again.
Once again, practice emotional intelligence, build on emotional intelligence.
Build emotional intelligence. And Saloni?
Yeah, there's not much, what do you say? I would say the same. You want to build on emotional intelligence, be able to make that difference.
Make the difference. Huh? Khushbu?
No doubt on that. Emotional intelligence, any day, any day.
Yeah, that's what the topic is about. Very good, well said. Now, Rashmi, what about you?
I think emotional intelligence, but in our organization, we have this word we care. So we care helps us building emotional intelligence.
Yeah, very well. We care. So, are there any more questions? Yes. You are using an ATM, only one machine in the room. Bank advises one person at a time. Another customer ignores this advice and enters the room. What do you do? Again, if you can answer that in one word. Rashmi, we'll start with you now. You can't always be last.
So he's saying that one person ignores the advice and enters. What do you do? I think there will be somebody at the ATM to politely go to the person and say that, sir, there's a queue and we would request you to join the queue. So I think going up and politely speaking to that person should help.
Okay. Khushbu?
I think yes, even I agree to this. And normally, I see signboards. So, if I were in that position, I would simply show him the signboard that, sir, we are supposed to be one at a time. So if you can, please. I'll only request him, of course.
See, the situation is such how it's explained that you're already on the machine and the person has already barged in. Now that person standing outside doesn't have, so probably you could still point out to him,
Yeah.
Unless he's some person and pounces on you, that's a different thing.
That's a different thing. Then I won't be seen, definitely.
Then the chapter is over. Saloni,
Yeah, I think it's being respectful. Whatever if a person has come in, and obviously the rule is that, and I'm sure we are wearing a mask, right? Because even though in ATM you're not supposed to wear mask or hide your face, but because of social distancing, you're supposed to wear masks and go out. So yes, you can point out, and of course there is a guard. There's always a guards outside ATMs to regulate, right? And you should be respectful in letting the person know that I'm going to take 2 minutes, and if you can just step out and then come in again.
very polite, very well said. Now, Sachin, what is your say on that?
Same. I think everyone's answered the question.
Yes.
I'll just probably ask that why the person is jumping the queue. What's the emergency? And that's probably what I would ask.
Very well. I think we need to close now because we've had quite a good number of questions. And I would like to thank all the panelists and the audience. I think we had a good session. We all went through all the- Yeah.
Sorry, there's one question which Dr. Priscilla says. Ma'am, if you can just put that question again in the chat box so that we can just look at it quickly.
Yeah, I haven't found that.
She just mentioned there's one question that has been answered. Where is it? Okay, I found it. So the question is that some employees they're not being paid and they're still teaching online. The leader has failed to communicate to its staff about salary issues and have caused people to become better, demotivated, and disengaged, with most of them resigning. As HR, how do you handle this as today's topic is concerned? Okay.
Maybe you can answer that. Yeah.
Right. So, and I can imagine that the business is, so the leadership has no clue of what needs to be done. There is no transparency, there is no communication. So as an HR person, we want to highlight this and we want to let the leadership know, the business know that this requires urgent attention, especially if we need to continue, we need to be in business, we need to make sure that we have people who understand that even if there is an interim period where we want them to kind of be happy with 50% salary release, and the balance will come to them once business picks up, right? But be upfront about it. And that's the guidance as an HR person I would give to the leadership, because instead of losing all people, it's better to let them know that this is what we're going through and this is what needs to be done, and get the leadership to then accordingly come out with whatever is decided. So communication is key. Decision making and communication is very key here. I hope that answers the question for you.
I think, Saloni, you've answered that rightly, because most organizations did well. I mean, those who had big money bags, it was okay, but those who didn't and were not ready for it, they communicated. And there was, if you go through Google, you will find umpteen letters on how people communicated that, this is not the time. I mean, we are not able to pay you correctly right now. We will pay you XX percentage. And then we'll, if possible, we will compensate you at a later date. And it's so very important, because if he doesn't know it's the end of his chapter or end of his employment, it is important to communicate, and communication is key, like you said. So I think we can close now, because I think, Payal, we can close now. And thanks a lot, everybody. I think it was a beautiful session. We spoke so much about emotions, and I hope we can learn and practice to run our emotions and not let our emotions run us, And there's one advice I would give to you all, is that never make a permanent decision on a temporary emotion. Most of us, at that point, that we get so perturbed by some emotion and we quickly take a decision. And this is what, can be a turning point in our life. So never make a permanent decision on a temporary emotion. And Govind, would you like to add anything if you're around?
No, I don't want to add anything. I think enough has been already said, but you have given me an opportunity to thanks all of you for being here, especially on a Saturday morning when it is mostly your family time, but you all came together to share your opinions on emotional intelligence. So thanks, Rashmi ma'am, for being a super moderator as usual, and Payal for hosting it so well. Sachin, Saloni, Khushbu, Rashmi to be our speaker. And I think I can tell this to the audience that all the speakers have done a great playlist on our YouTube channel on emotional intelligence. And they have covered a wide range of connections with emotional intelligence. I could see connecting EI with recruitment and onboarding and performance and leadership. So there's a lot to learn. So if you're interested and you wanted to learn more about emotional intelligence, please feel free to go to our YouTube channel and watch that playlist. You can also put your questions out there, and I hope that our speakers will be there to answer them on YouTube itself. So thank you very much, all of you, and a great session.